news. Tickets for the Conference on Religious Trauma, Court 2023, are now available. Also, if you're interested in an ad-free version of the Divorcing Religion podcast, come join me over on Patreon. Links for both are in the show notes. Thanks. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Divorcing Religion podcast. I'm your host, Janice Selby. If you're interested in commercial-free episodes of the Divorcing Religion podcast, please join me over on Patreon. My guest today is fourth-generation Japanese-American Scott Okamoto. In addition to being a writer and musician, Scott also hosts the podcast Chapel Probation, where he interviews ex-evangelical alumni of Christian colleges. Scott was recommended to be my guest today because of his new book, Asian American Apostate, Losing Religion and Finding Myself at an Evangelical University. Asian American Apostate was characterized to me as a wild ride through white bigotry and faux intellectualism taken by a person of color and popular teacher at an evangelical college, a ride that caused him to leave evangelicalism altogether. Publishers Weekly had this to say about Scott's book. Okamoto's perspective on being Asian American in a white, insular, evangelical environment is fascinating and candidly expressed. And Brad Onishi, a former guest on the Divorcing Religion podcast, shared these thoughts on Scott's book. Asian American Apostate is a stunning contribution to the topic of deconstruction and leaving high-demand religion that for too long has been almost exclusively occupied by white voices. Wow. Welcome, Scott Okamoto. You got some rave reviews there.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be able to talk to you.
Very nice. Is this your first book?
It is.
Oh, you started off with a bang.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
I lived a bang, so it translated to a book.
Wonderful. Well, tell us then, if you would, a little bit about your background, what it was like growing up in your family in particular, and how maybe religion and faith influenced you in that way.
Sure. Both my parents were born during World War II, the beginning of World War II, and their families were incarcerated in the Japanese-American incarceration camps. So their families basically lost everything and were stuck in jail in various prison camps in the deserts of America. And interestingly, or kind of tragically, both of their families kind of came out of that situation feeling like they needed to be super American and patriotic and kind of deny a lot of their identity as Japanese Americans. They were all citizens of America. But I think the experience really spooked them and scared them from, they were clearly Japanese American, but they did their darndest to assimilate and to prove to the world around them that they were good Americans. My dad was an Eagle Scout in the Boy Scouts. My mom attended college and my dad became a dentist. And I think to my parents, one way to approximate whiteness was to become evangelical Christians in the 70s. So they were kind of ripe for the picking when some friends invited them to something called Bible Study Fellowship, which is this sort of parachurch organization that just makes you do a lot of homework and read the Bible and take notes. And it didn't seem fun to me when I was a little kid, but we found ourselves attending a big church here in Pasadena called Lake Avenue Church. And so they got me and my brother early on. we were, because when you're a little kid, church is fun. Church, you don't have all the politics and culture wars that you see as adults. So church was singing songs and, drinking juice and learning about Jesus who loves us. And so, I don't know. My parents had their excuse of sort of trying to be American and prove to their communities that they were. My brother and I had the excuse of, well, we were kids. So they nailed us. And, so each step of growth gets more intense in Christianity. So you get it to like middle school, and suddenly they're telling you got to live for Jesus and live your faith and evangelize to the world and be a good person, and don't do this and do this. And the high control is like, it's like the frog in the boiling water thing. It's like it doesn't just go from 0 to 100. It just gradually steps you up in intensity. And so I was there I was all in. I learned how to play guitar to play on the worship teams. And, the church was mostly white, but, I kind of picked up where my parents left off, and I thought, well, I knew I was different. I was a Japanese American kid in a mostly white city. It's called Arcadia, California, which is funny now because it's known to be kind of a Taiwanese city today through immigration. But back then, we were the only ones in our neighborhood. And so I kind of made it a point to out-white the white folks. I played baseball. I was in Cub Scouts. I hunted and fished with my dad. It's embarrassing. I was kind of like this wannabe redneck kid, who could be a rugged outdoorsman, who could play baseball, who could play guitar. I didn't know it at the time, but I think the mission was always to sort of excel at all the majority culture things. And I still like most of those things. I don't like guns anymore, but I like fishing and I like music. Sure. And so I'm glad I did those things. But as a kid, that, including church and being a good Christian, was sort of my way of approximating majority culture whiteness.
Yeah. Did you guys talk about it at home, Scott? Did your parents talk with you about racist things that were going on, or about the drive, what was compelling them to try and kind of blend in more with the white American culture? Was that something you guys discussed?
Not overtly. It was never in like political terms. I mean, we of course noticed if someone ching-chonged us or, told us to go back to wherever they thought we were from. Mm-hmm. And so, that was the big elephant in the room, but we never really talked about, pushing back on that. It was just the way our family pushed back at that was to just be better Americans, be better students or better at church or stronger Christians, and then, my parents would tell us, they can't take that away from you. It was kind of misguided because no matter how you see yourself, if the culture around you doesn't see you that way, then you're kind of not that to them, right? Mm-hmm. And so even though I had a pretty strong sense of self and had found success, we couldn't escape the fact that we look different, come from different backgrounds. And but I mean, I had friends, and I did, by all accounts, I did well. I did fine. I had a good childhood. It wasn't until I looked back and sort of found myself really interrogating my identity and figuring out what that meant, so I looked back and thought, wow, man, I was really trying to deny being Japanese American and really, it's embarrassing to say, but really trying to assume a white identity to fit in and to succeed in life.
Wow. Yeah, that makes perfect
70s.
Sense. Yes.
Yeah, it's a long time ago. It wasn't all this diversity and pride in stuff. It was just like, no, just survive and sit in and fit in to where you're at.
Right. Were you, was it kind of a Keith Green home, like the 70s Jesus people music?
Amy Grant.
Amy Grant, of course.
Yeah. We were an Amy Grant household.
Okay. Yes, I can remember, and I feel that as well. So then you went through school, and you were continuing to participate in the various Boy Scouts and all these things, softball and hunting and fishing with your dad. And then at some point you felt led or decided to attend a Christian college?
Actually, I felt like Christian college was a cop-out. I was that Christian. It's like, since I didn't want to be a pastor, so I thought, no, I was a good student. I was a band geek. I had the stats to go to, a lot of places. So I went to UC San Diego for undergrad.
Okay.
And there I thought I was going to bring Jesus and the Bible to, an unredeemed place, heavy on science.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was weird. I think because my parents converted late in life, it was both kind of intense, but it was also, they still carried with them the value of education and the value of succeeding in this world, because they came from literally nothing and both went to college and put us in, the middle class of Southern California. So, yeah, I think going to a Christian college to me back then would have been a failure of education.
Mm-hmm.
So I did join InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, which is like a college ministry thing. So I still had the Christian culture and all the Christian experiences, but we felt like we were on the front lines of, the real big bad world. And so I had both experiences. I had a very intense Christian evangelical experience in college, but I also had a top-notch education. I had Nobel laureates for professors.
Wow.
I had Toni Morrison come to my writing class.
Amazing.
And so, yeah, I had, I guess, the best of both worlds, you could say, even though the university part was kind of crappy as I look back. But I formed relationships and I had great experiences becoming a leader. I was a worship leader, which is cool if you're a Christian, but like once you get out of that, it's like, oh man, that's so embarrassing.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I can relate to so much of that.
Yeah.
And so then you got your education in a secular institution.
Yeah.
And then what tipped it for you? You ended up teaching at an evangelical school. How did that go?
Kind of by accident. I got my master's in writing and I was working as a journalist. I started teaching community college composition classes because I put myself and my wife through grad school as a school teacher. I did middle school and bilingual elementary, and I speak Spanish. I don't speak Japanese. It's another result of coming out of the camps. I think most of my generation doesn't speak Japanese. But I heard from a family friend that this school here, which is nearby, it's called. Do you care if we say the name? Because I don't care.
You can say it.
Oh yeah, it's called Azusa Pacific.
Oh, Azusa.
Yeah. I didn't write them in the book because I've already been bashing them on my podcast for a year, and I thought I'm going to give them a break and just say this could be all the stories I tell in my book could be any evangelical school. It's not unique to them. But yeah, it was Azusa Pacific, and a family friend said they were hiring. I think he taught in the sciences. I always put quote unquote sciences.
Yeah.
Because they don't actually believe in the sciences. Right. And so I thought, well, at the time I was still a Christian, barely hanging on. I was what I would have called a progressive Christian, an affirming Christian, a social justice Christian.
Hey.
Still figuring out my own identity as an Asian American. But yeah, I thought I still speak evangelicalese. I can whip out that language whenever I need to. And I got, I did an interview there and they hired me on the spot to be an adjunct. And I thought, well, okay, it's an opportunity to get more experience teaching. I'll stay here for a semester or two until I can get full-time at one of these community colleges that I was teaching at. I was a freeway flyer adjunct. I was commuting all over Southern California to teach.
Okay. And you were, so you had already been on somewhat of a journey of deconversion, although you wouldn't have recognized it as such, moving from a more fundamentalist space to a more progressive space. Was your wife or your partner making the same journey at the same time as you?
Yes, fortunately, because I know that can be a breaking point for a lot of relationships,
Right. How about your folks?
Or social. My folks took it hard. They still attend that church from way back when, Lake Avenue. And, they're heavily involved in leadership. And I'm sure my book is not going to help their social situation.
Oh dear. Oh,
So they're
dear.
doing their best to be supportive. They're proud of me, but
Yes.
yeah, we don't talk a lot about the faith issues. Even back then, because I was already kind of pushing back. I was like, we're both Christians, and you hang out with these horrible, racist, homophobic people at your church that I wanted nothing to do with.
Right. And it wasn't the same issue for them.
No, they just felt like they're following their faith. It's
Wow.
completely, ignorant of the fact that Christianity has a wide range of beliefs about all these things: race, sexuality, the role of women. So they're just, happy to be in their bubble. And again, I think coming out of the camps, that generation, they're not thrilled about making waves, rocking the boat. They just want to like settle in, put their heads down, and exist peacefully without being thrown back in jail.
Of course.
Because simply by being Japanese, their families were stuck in jail in the middle of the desert. That's for no other reason. The government had no reason to doubt their loyalty, but West Coast farmers saw it as a perfect time to like reclaim farmland from the Japanese farms. And they admitted this. This is all stuff you can read in the LA Times from the 40s. Horrible.
Yeah. And I know we did likewise in Canada, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Just a very horrible time in our history, that's for sure. And it does leave a scar, as you say.
Yeah. And there's a great book by a Canadian writer, Joy Kogawa, called Obasan, which is in a lot of reading lists for elementary schools and middle schools in Canada, talking about the Canadian experience of the camps.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, it's. I studied Asian American literature in college. Something else I would not have been able to do at a Christian college.
That's true.
So there I was, and then they kept promoting me at APU because they didn't have any diversity in the faculty, and I was. I'll brag a little. I was a good professor. Students liked taking my classes. Some of them were kind of alarmed because I brought kind of this raw, real world vibe to that they had never seen before. And
were you challenging some of the, some of the courses or anything that was going on there as far as, well, that's a very fundamentalist way to look at things. Here's a different way to look at things.
Yeah. Gently, I never wanted them to feel like I was telling them what to think, but whether a student came to my class as hyper conservative or fundamentalist or liberal, I was trained to just, gently push back and say, can you defend this position? Because I was teaching writing, or argumentation and eventually literature. And so I did that with everybody to say, not to be a jerk about it, but to help them be able to defend what their thoughts were, what their opinions were about anything, faith, politics, life, culture. And so I had a great time because I saw myself in a lot of these students who were so innocent and so ignorant of anything outside of their church bubbles that they came from. And I was aware, there were some tumultuous times for me at UC San Diego, with these big classes with teachers that were sometimes hostile to Christianity. And I felt like I cut my teeth, dealing with that, but I didn't want to be that, I didn't want to be the intimidating professor. I wanted to be the professor that said, look, I care about you and your learning and your development. It's going to be tough, but let's go through this together and let's talk about what the different perspectives are that on any given topic. I didn't realize that doing so just makes you a raging liberal in these spaces because people don't, people go to college for a lot of reasons, but people who go to evangelical colleges, I learned very quickly, do not go to college to have anything challenged or to have anything really looked at or inspected with a critical eye. They go there to have everything reflected back on them, all of their church stuff, Sunday school classes. They go to a school like APU to just have all that confirmed. and anything outside of that is scary and threatening, and including to the other faculty and the administration.
That was my next question. Yeah. Did you experience hostility or pushback or just concern from the faculty who maybe saw that you were far more liberal than they were comfortable with, and they didn't appreciate the things that you were bringing to the classroom? I don't know. What was it like for you?
Luckily, I was in an English department that was pretty open-minded. I'd say they're mostly right of center, but not far right. The rest of the school was pretty far right. So I was in a good department, and my department chairs, I had 2 department chairs, were very supportive of anything I felt like was useful in a classroom. I could assign any text, have any discussion. I mean, they warned me, we're cool with you talking about social justice and feminism and race. The school may not be, so just be careful. And they were right. The administration, I was hauled in to talk to my chair, on average once a semester, for something I said or did in class that, that some student was offended by, or parents would call because they're the paying customers. And
wow. So yeah. What was that like to receive, those kind of slaps on the wrist? Did those add to your leaning towards deconversion altogether?
Yeah. So it was, as a good Christian kid growing up, it was 2 things. It was terrifying because I was never in trouble my whole life. I was the good kid, and here I was suddenly seen as the bad guy. Mm-hmm. That said, it was kind of fun being the bad guy. It was I discovered a whole new thing. They were just talking about race terrifies white evangelicals because it's so far out of their understanding or experience. And so coming from this background where I'm the good kid, I'm the church leader, I'm the, and suddenly being Darth Vader to them was kind of fun because I knew I wasn't Darth Vader. In my book I write, it felt like I was, if you're a Star Wars fan, I felt like I was a Jedi teaching in a Sith academy. They saw it the other way. I was the Sith teaching, leading the Jedis astray. It's a great analogy, the Force, because there's so many sides of Christianity. And there's great, progressive, loving, caring Christians, and then there's those evil, Donald Trump Christians that, and supposedly they believe in the same God and the same Jesus, but man, they couldn't be more different as far as practice. And so yeah. To answer your question, it was hard and kind of fun to sort of inhabit this duality of, I think I'm helping make the world a better place by helping Christians be more caring and be more sympathetic and empathetic to the people around them. And a lot of my students took it very well. I'd say 90% of my students loved being in my class, and we had amazing conversations and discussions. It was just that 10% that couldn't see me as anything other than just evil Satan,
Wow. Yeah. And so were you talking to your wife, as these things were going on too? You have to have someone to bounce the things off of, and often it ends up, of course, being the person closest to us.
For sure. She would eventually get sick of hearing it because every day I could come home with like, oh my God, you will not believe what some kid said today. Aww. And a lot of these stories are in my book, just ridiculous stuff. Wow. Racist, sexist, just ignorant, that they say with such conviction and such confidence, and it doesn't take any effort to just destroy what they said. And I always try to do it gently. I'm like, wow, okay, you said this, so this is how that comes across to someone else, that's maybe not in this room, or maybe is in the room. And so I always made sure I had the back, because the vibe at APU was to the students of color and to the underground queer kids, is that stuff got said in classrooms all the time that were like overtly racist or homophobic or sexist. And most of the professors would just sort of say, "Oh, yeah, that's interesting. Good point." And no one who was marginalized, very few people who were marginalized felt supported by the professors. And so I heard this repeatedly from the students. And so I always made sure, this is a safe space for those fundy kids to speak their minds, but I'm also going to make it safe for everyone else too. So,
Nice.
or maybe it's dangerous for all of us, but it's going to be equal. I'm not going to coddle any one identity. We're all going to be challenged. We're all going to be seen and heard. And so that made for some pretty fascinating stories that are in the book. And on my website, there's a couple of videos where I did some storytelling events, and you can hear about some of those.
Excellent. Yeah, it sounds like you were the type of professor that people were fortunate to have, because you did gently push back and want to, as you say, create a safe space for everyone, where everyone gets to be heard, and also to have their ideas challenged. Ooh, I hate to say it, but iron sharpens iron.
Right? Yeah. I think the Bible borrowed from Buddhism with that saying.
I think they probably did. So then, how long were you in that capacity until you realized, oh, I don't even have any faith left?
Yeah. And you had asked if all the trouble and pushback affected my faith. I would say it didn't. I think I was just already on this path out of faith. I was asking the questions that didn't have answers, whether it be about suffering or theodicy. If God is omniscient and all knowing, does he know these horrible things are going to happen, like Sandy Hook? Or if so, did he cause them to happen? Or was he powerless to stop it? Or, all these questions that I had always had throughout my life. But it was just getting to the point where I thought coming to a flagship evangelical university that's accredited, I might get some of these answers, and I might be able to regain some footing for my faith. But really, no. I got all the same trite BS answers that I had got my whole life. These are, and so yeah. Because people always ask, was all the trauma of racism and bigotry part of your deconstruction? And I always say no, because I was really, I could accept those things as reality. I saw that as my job to confront that. Christianity is a tough life. You make decisions you sacrifice some of the things you want out of life for this purpose, right? This mission that we're on to save the world and, to build this community and faith in Jesus. And so yeah, it didn't help to have all this bigotry and sort of white nationalism is what I later learned it was. But that had really nothing to do with my deconstruction of faith. It was mostly just the deep theological questions. And, by the time I was there for a couple of years, I wasn't claiming to be anything to do with evangelical, because I was like, man, these people are nuts. These people are war. This is the W. Bush years. These people are warmongers. They want to bomb the hell out of whoever, in the Middle East. And they hate so many people. They hate gay people. They not too great with women. I wanted nothing to do with the term evangelical, even though I was at a flagship evangelical school. And then when Bush won re-election in 2004, I think it was during that year, I was like, I don't even think I believe, I remember when I first started teaching, I learned that a lot of professors started class with prayer, which was a bizarre thing for me in a college classroom to be praying. I'm like, that's what church is for. It's what Bible study is for. That's whatever. Prayer in beginning of English class. So I did it. And by by the end of a few years, I just stopped. Students would take way too long sharing their prayer requests. I didn't need to hear about your boyfriend problems, your roommate problems, or I was like, you guys have time for this. You don't know what a noun is. Like, we don't have time to go through what all your prayer requests are, in class. You can email each other. We can, yeah. So I remember one kid asked, why don't you ever pray in class anymore? It's like, oh, I guess we should then. But then I thought, no, I'm not gonna. I didn't even know if I believed in prayer. I realized, I was like, I guess I had just sort of ghosted Christianity and without any, because it was never, like today, if you deconstruct, you can go on Twitter and say, hey, I'm deconstructing, and there's communities and resources and podcasts to talk about it, but back then there was nothing. It was just like, oh man, I think I'm out, but no one knows I'm out other than my wife and my closest friends. And
wow,
I don't even know, I had read Bart Ehrman books, which kind of takes a nuclear bomb to the Bible as anything reliable, right? It's just like, oh man, if our one thing that informs our faith is unreliable, then where does that leave us? Right? And so, yeah, it was all these things that sort of led to my man. And then of course, the year that I decided I wasn't even a Christian anymore, they gave me a full-time job.
Oh.
And so I had to decide. I got hired to teach part-time at USC, which is a very, high-paying private college. People probably have heard of USC. And APU gave me a full-time gig with benefits, and I picked APU, and I to this day kick myself for that. I might still be an educator if I did the USC gig, but I stayed at APU because we had just started an Asian club, and it gave me one more sort of route at the school, because these kids were lost. These kids were coming in and they didn't have any clue about being Asian American, and then an underground, completely illegal LGBTQIA club started up.
Whoa.
And they had asked me to be sort of their faculty advisor, because I had made it known that, I didn't hate gay people. I had made it known that I was there to support queer students.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I went to grad school in San Francisco, and that was a sort of transformative experience. But I was, at the time I was still Christian.
Yeah.
But anyway, I thought I really felt like I was needed at this school, not just to teach English to the clueless, fundamentalists, but also to support these kids who are being hammered every day of their life at this school with microaggressions and ignorance, and for the Asian kids, and just outright hatred and bigotry for the queer kids. And so it just felt like leaving would have left a sort of a purpose that I felt in life, because it's very rare, I think, in this world to have employment that you love. And I loved being in the classroom. I didn't like grading papers, but I loved being in the classroom, and I loved playing that role of helping students feel empowered through language and literature. That was an honor to do that. Add to that this opportunity to help marginalized people find footing in their culture. I felt like I was living the dream, other than the fact that my administration hated me and most of my colleagues thought I was Satan. And,
oh no.
I really, and I never proselytized students, even when I lost my faith completely. I never, ever tried to convince someone not to be Christian. I thought, if I can do this, if I can support these marginalized kids, teach English, because by this point I was teaching, creative writing, Shakespeare, doing independent studies with kids who wanted to write things. If I could do all that, and I could help the regular students be better Christians, be more informed, be more caring, and following the actual words of Jesus, then I could do this. I don't have to be this. to be able to do it.
Okay. You were really
so
holding space.
I was trying. Yeah. So I stayed there until they kicked me out.
Well, do tell us a little bit about that. I know we don't want to give everything away from your book, but do tell us some about how that happened and what it was like.
Yeah, sure. And this story makes up about 2/3 of the book. I wanted it to be part the story of deconstructing and surviving this experience, but also developing into the person that I am as a proud Japanese American, fourth generation Japanese American, who lives in community with amazing people that have nothing to do with Christianity. And so it's those two parts of the book. So yeah, I can tell the story. I once the LGBTQIA kids organized, we started putting on events on campus. It was very brazen.
Very bold.
We called them art nights, just generic. And they were kind of curated and part curated and part open mic. People would read poems about what it's like to be gay in this community, what it's like to be in the closet, or which I guess they weren't anymore if they did this. People sang songs. There was visual art. Some people just stood on that stage wherever we did this in the middle of campus and told stories about the hateful things that were said and done to them. Mm-hmm. And so I knew it was a matter of time before the administration got wind that I was involved with this, because I was there. I sang songs at these events. And
wow.
So when they asked me to be involved with this club, I didn't jump in. I would like to say, of course, I rushed in and, helped. I had to really think about it because I knew this could be the end of my career. Because at this point, I'd been there, 10 years. And, I knew I wanted to find employment somewhere else, but I knew the longer I stayed there, the less likely that was going to be, because who wants to look at a resume that says 10 years at this really crappy evangelical school that's barely accredited, It's not exactly a stellar resume to put down in front of someone at that point. So I also knew that if I said yes to this, I was already in trouble all the time. It was going to give them more reason to kick me out. And so, but I did. I eventually just did it. I just felt like that's the right thing to do. I was privileged. My wife works. My wife is a dentist. And so, she made a lot more money than I did. Short of that, if she were a stay-at-home mom, and, I would have probably been way more cautious. So, because people say, why didn't more professors, take a stand like you? And I'm like, well, that was their only option as far as employment, for all the reasons I just said. You're not going to get it. If you've been a full-time professor at APU, you're not going to get hired at anywhere else other than another Christian school,
Right.
And there aren't that many of them.
Here's a shameless plug for the Clergy Project for people who have been clergy or involved, maybe even instructing at Christian universities and schools and find themselves on the other side of faith and they need some support. Clergy Project is really helpful for that. Thank you. Please continue with your story.
Yeah. Yeah. My friends have a great podcast called Rev Covery. Justin and Sarah, they're both former pastors, and their podcast is all about life after being a pastor. And,
right on.
Rev Covery, yeah, that's really great. So yeah, I'm glad there are resources out there because it's tough. Leaving the faith is tough, but when your employment is faith based, it makes it tough. So
it really does. I'm glad that your wife was in such a financial position that you could make the choices that you made, because I'm sure you were a lifeline to some of those students.
Yeah, probably. And but I felt like they were a lifeline to me. Interestingly, I was inspired by their courage and their willingness to just get through each day, because a lot of them, this was the only school their parents were going to pay for. So they were kind of stuck here and, or they didn't come out until they were like a junior. They didn't realize they were queer, and they fought it, or they tried to heal and do all that horrible reparative therapy.
Mm-hmm.
So they're just trying to get through, and they needed resources. They needed someone. They needed community. So yeah. So eventually, the school was just fed up with me for being involved with this. I was told to not be involved. I was confronted, and I didn't.
Wow.
I didn't listen to them. And so they demoted me. So I lost my full-time status.
Mm-hmm.
I went back to a 1-year lecturer contract, and then 2 years later they demoted me all the way back to entry-level adjunct.
Wow.
And still I'm hanging on, just because there were things happening with the multi-ethnic organizations, including the Asian Club. There was plenty going on with this group that eventually became known as Haven, and they made national news a couple times while I was there and after, for their activities and some of the things they were pushing. And finally, in 2013, the dean called me in, and I knew what he was going to say.
Mm-hmm.
I knew this was it. So I figured, this is the end. I'm going out guns blazing, man. I have so much I want to say to this man.
Wow,
if you're gonna represent the school and get rid of me, I got some stuff to say. And I went in there, and he thought he had me nailed. I'll share this from the book. So toward the end, I was getting pretty cynical, and I knew the writing was on the wall. And I signed a paper to a lit class. And I said, I'll give anyone, because I was so sick of grading papers. I said, I'll give anyone extra credit if you use the F word somewhere in your essay.
Oh, you didn't, did you? Oh my gosh. That's
so
awesome.
You're laughing. So there's two kinds of people in this world. There's the kinds of people that think that's funny. Because I did it because I want to make sure I read every word of your essays, because I'm kind of burned out. So if I know that I'm looking for this word, I will be sure to read every word of your essays and not just skim it and phone it in. I said, if you don't want to write an F word, then write a Bible verse. I'll look for that too. So you don't have to write an F word. Mm-hmm. Most students do. So, and then I think I said something like, yeah, and if you really hate me, you can just put this on my student evaluation that I did this and write Okamoto's evil. And so I said that. And then I also said, one time I handed out the student evaluations, and I was in a mood. I said, oh yeah, you guys should just write, Okamoto thinks he's right and the school is wrong about LGBTQ issues. Wow. If you I was like, some of you want to write negative things about me, but if you're going to do that, I'll tell you what to write. And students did that.
Wow. So
I arrive at this meeting, and the dean's sitting there looking smug with a stack of student evaluations. He only had the negative ones. I had a stack, a foot tall of 15 years of positive evaluations. He had this little stack of these negative ones, and he starts reading them to me. And I started laughing because, oh my God, that's literally what I had told the students to write.
They were obedient.
Yeah. And some of them wrote it just to be funny too. They didn't even agree. But I was like, all right, you want me to write it? I'll write it. So I'm smiling while he's reading this, and he looks up at me and he's like, do you think this is funny? And I said, yes, I do. And he turned bright red. He was, I think he wanted to hit me, or he was so mad at me. And I was trying so hard not to laugh. I couldn't even explain why it was funny in that moment. So he just kept reading. After he finished, I just lit into him. I was just like, and it started with, I knew I wanted to start with, this school is on the wrong side of history.
Yes.
On everything, whether it's race, sexuality, gender. And I just launched into this thing. And I said, you accuse me of all these things. I got a stack 10 times that high at home of positive things, of students telling me that their Christianity was made better by taking my class. Where are those evaluations? And he's like, well, they didn't give me, my secretary didn't give those to me. I'm like, clearly. So I'll bring you and he's like, and he had said, I'm a harm to the school. I'm a harm to the school. I'm a harm to the school.
Wow.
like, I'm a harm to racism. I'm a harm to sexism and homophobia. Yes. So if that's what the school is for, then yeah, I'm a harm to it. And
Yes.
it's like, I do not proselytize to classes. I do not tell them what to think. And I know you think I do, but you have no idea what I'm doing in these classes. And you're just sitting here reading these cherry-picked evaluations. And, he was like, oh, well, I didn't realize this. Now, meanwhile, my chairperson is sitting there in the corner just trembling with fear, like thinking,
No.
I'm about to get the axe.
Mm-hmm.
Said nothing. And so to everyone's surprise, the dean was like, well, I was going to fire you, but I have some new things to consider now. So I would like you to stay on.
Whoa.
So I'm thinking mixed feelings. Like I came in here to go out guns blazing, like
that's right.
Butch Cassidy and Sunday. It's like, and here you're going to keep me on? I'm like, okay. So I go home and my wife was like, why would you ever want to stay at that place? She's like, it's your adjunct pay is very helpful to our household. We had 3 kids, but we'll survive without.
Mm-hmm.
I had 3 kids at 3 different schools. I was already the home cook.
Yeah.
She's like, I need you to stay home. I need you to drive the kids to all their schools and all their after school things. And I need you to cook and clean. And, so I was like, okay. So that morning I wrote an email, said, yeah, sorry, I quit.
Oh, wow.
After all that, was not received well. I was locked out of the system within 5 minutes of hitting send.
Is that so? Wow. So you didn't even get to say goodbye to your students?
No, well, luckily the semester had just ended, but I didn't get to say goodbye to my department. I started composing an email to my department, this tearful goodbye, and I hit send and I had no more email account. And so here's how the school controls people. I printed out the email and I mailed it to a colleague. Said, can you please just stick this in everyone's box? I just really want to say goodbye officially after 15 years. I had been there so long.
Time.
And he mailed them back to me. He was too afraid to just stick these things in the email, in the mail slots of the department, because being associated with me would have been too dangerous.
Oh.
So I didn't even get to say goodbye to my own department. It was just like gone. And then, but yeah, it was time. It was fine. It was tough. I became a stay-at-home. I had never not worked since I was a sophomore in college. And suddenly, being a parent is definitely work.
Absolutely.
I was busy.
Yeah. What a transition.
Yeah. And it was great too, to sort of push back at patriarchy. My kids
love it.
have a dad that drove them to school and did help them with their homework and, did all these things. And the mom brought home the bacon, for the last 10 years. Yeah.
So then how long was it from the time that you quit at APU and then you actually wrote your book? How much time was there?
It was a 10-year process. I started writing it in 2010 when I was still there, but I didn't know it was a book. There were so many crazy stories happening. I started writing them down and I started sharing these stories in bars and at storytelling events. And, people loved it too. People were like, wow, what's it really like inside those, wacky evangelical spaces? And I'm like, well, let me tell you, it's worse than you think. So I was known to be the storyteller of, the inside of the evangelical beast.
Yeah.
At the time I started writing these down, well, maybe this could be a book. I thought I was still going to be working there. So it'll be a gentle book where we poke gentle fun at the shenanigans, but also find a way forward. Because that was my thing. I've figured out you can bridge the gap between liberal and conservative in the context of a relationship. In good faith, 2 people coming together to share your lives, and there's a few of these stories in the book. It's not just a hit piece on the school. I was able to form relationships and help kids, be nicer, be more caring.
Yeah, it even sounds like you your guns a-blazing episode there with the president who was prepared to fire you over these things, you gave him legitimate food for thought. He stepped back from what he absolutely thought he was going to do. So that's very interesting to me, because it's like that throwing a rock into the pond and the ripples are spreading out. We never know how far an action or a word is going to travel.
Yeah, it's a nice image. I don't think that he was the dean. I don't think
the dean.
I don't think he had any big like worldview shift. It's just for that moment I was better at arguing than he was. Yeah.
So now you've written this book, and you're getting some rave reviews from some significant people, because you're bringing a different voice and perspective to a topic that has largely been occupied by Caucasian people, talking about deconstruction. So this is really significant. And is there a community? Oh, of course, you have your podcast as well. So do you see a community developing around this issue in particular?
For sure, about deconstruction, yeah. A friend of mine's back maybe 3 or 4 years ago said, you need to get on Twitter. And I was like, well, I don't want to. I don't like Twitter. Like, I had an account. I had 12 or 13 followers. Yeah. But I went and I started engaging with people, and that's how I met, people like Brad Onishi, who you mentioned before, and Chrissy Stroop and Blake Chastain, who were sort of
excellent
the early people to start the ex-evangelical hashtag. And so, yeah, there is a community, and I've met people now in real life. We had a meetup in Portland last year with a whole bunch of other podcasters. And
how cool! So
coming out of the pandemic, to be able to meet and have a beer with all these people that I only knew their Twitter handles, some of them I didn't even know what they look like, has been great. And we've had more of these events. I had a book release event, and a whole bunch of folks, Twitter friends, basically, flew out to LA. To
that's so
attend
cool.
my book release. Yeah, it was amazing. So yeah, there's a community, and I'm great friends with Brad Onishi now. It's
nice.
I think we are the only two Asian American book writers in this space. So we need more, and to take nothing away from white stories, that we need those stories too. We just need all of them. It's still a pretty white space that because evangelicalism is a pretty white space, and so if everyone's coming out of that, just math, it's just
right.
But that leaves, there are percentages of people of color who are leaving faith as well, and we're just starting to see, I think, more voices coming out. And my publisher, Lake Drive Books, does a great job of centering all different kinds of perspectives, whether they be racial or theological or, in my case, kind of atheist.
Yes.
Yeah.
Your photos are interesting that you have on your site. It looks like, you have fully embraced being an atheist. Can you talk a little bit about any of those pictures? I'm gonna give your website.
Yeah, which pictures are you talking about?
It did look like perhaps you were in front of a backdrop that had.
Yeah, that was satire. Because everyone assumes, you stop being a Christian, then you're satanic or
right.
or I don't know what they think. And I don't even claim atheism. I don't know. I'm a nun.
Oh, nice.
I get on any given day. I have belief or non-belief. It's just I believe in the mysteries of life, in the world, in the universe, and I don't have any answers. I feel like atheism to me is too strong of a certainty in something, even though that's like a certainty in not believing in something. Right. But it's a label. I don't believe in God, but I believe in mystery, and there's things that you can't answer with science and logic and rationality. I'm cool with that, and I think it's great to have this sort of vague understanding of the universe because we don't. So yeah, the picture, I to promote the book, I thought it would be funny I went on Amazon and I bought I typed cult costume. So it's like this black robe with a black hood and a rope belt. And I took my daughter to an AC/DC concert years ago, and we had these devil horns.
Oh my gosh!
And so I had that, and so I took some pictures, and then just for fun, I'm like, well, devil something, satanic imagery. And so for like $9, there was this big tapestry of like this crazy satanic thing. So I took a bunch of pictures standing in front of this, holding a Bible and holding my book, because my book looks like we designed it to look like a Bible.
It does, yeah.
And so it's just this vague, nonsensical imagery of like, oh, what is he? Is he Satanist? Is he a cult leader? Is he what? What does apostate mean? Yeah, that was the thing. Just playing with that idea. My poor parents literally thought I had become a Satan worshiper, and were kind of. It's like, so this is satire. This is. If I don't believe in Jesus, I probably don't believe in Satan.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's I can relate when you say your folks, they don't quite maybe have a full understanding of where you're at, or maybe they don't even want to, but they want to retain the relationships. You guys are just ginger and careful. You tread lightly on those topics that are sensitive. And I am in the same predicament with my elderly mother, who wants to support me in my career, but she also is still a believer herself. I love that you referred to yourself as a nun, because I tell people I divorced religion and became a nun, and of course we mean None.
Yeah. None. That'd be ironic if we were at NUN suddenly.
Wouldn't it? Oh, this has been
There's
really
a twist.
Fun. Yes, for sure. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for writing about your experiences. And I feel like I received an education from you today about some things that I hadn't really considered before. So thanks for that. How can people reach you?
Oh, yeah. And thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed talking.
My pleasure.
I have a website, rscottokamoto.com, which is kind of the hub for everything. And that'll connect you to my podcast, which is called Chapel Probation. We're in our third season. It's just stories of people who survived evangelical or just religious higher education. They're students. It's the first season is like people I knew and I kept in touch with. Opened it up second season to people all over the country, went to all different kinds of schools, including, people from faculty and administration. Yeah, we bring it all. And this season, I'm just sort of like a free for all of like, whatever comes. I think we've told all the stories. We've established that evangelical schools are kind of crappy, and there's racism and homophobia and sexism. It's like, how many times, and to take nothing away, like every story that's told is sacred to me. It's these are people who aren't necessarily, public figures telling their stories, and I honor that. It's really great. So the website, I'm on Twitter and Instagram as RS Okamoto. Right. I would love to keep the conversation going and to answer any questions anyone has.
Very good. Yeah. I want everyone to run out and buy a copy of Asian American Apostate: Losing Religion and Finding Myself at an Evangelical University. Such a great name for such a great title too. So thank you everyone also for joining us today on the Divorcing Religion podcast. If you have any feedback, I'd love to hear it. You can drop me a line at divorcing-religion.com is my website. Also, you can go to the YouTube channel, Conference on Religious Trauma. And thanks again, Scott. It was a real delight hearing from you today.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye, everyone.